Hello, so it's October the 11th, 2020, and today I wanted to offer my 2p on the debate about Scottish independence. And I wanted to say this. An independent Scotland could become the richest country on earth on a per capita basis. Now, I'm not joking when I say that. It has all the necessary ingredients. Now, let me explain. Firstly, how do you measure how wealthy a country is on a per capita basis? And the traditional method is GDP per capita. You take everything that that country produces in a year and divide it by the number of people in that country. The problem with that measure is that it's extremely flawed. You have a country like Ireland, which is currently the fifth richest country in the world on a per capita basis. Now, Ireland is not the fifth richest company in the world, but because huge companies like Google and Apple base themselves there and Ireland's population is relatively small, only about 5 million, you come out with these figures, these slightly flawed figures. Credit Suisse has its own measure, wealth per adult, but this too has its own distortions. Countries with overpriced housing markets, the UK for example, tend to rank very high. The UK is 12th on this measure, and Australia is actually second. Countries with older populations tend to rank very high on Credit Suisse's measure as well, because older people have had more time to build up wealth, Japan for example, and also their assets have risen in value because of the debasement of currency that's gone on for many years. And Switzerland's actually the richest country in the world according to this measure, but how much of Switzerland's per capita wealth is to do with the fact that so many people from elsewhere in the world keep their money in Switzerland? So we're going to sort of meet somewhere in the middle and use the World Bank's gross national income per capita, and that sits somewhere between those two other measures. It's flawed, but it will do. Now, the UK sits at a rather disappointing 22nd place, but topping the rankings, you have the likes of Liechtenstein. Bermuda doesn't actually count because it's not a country. Switzerland, Norway, Macau and the Isle of Man don't count. Luxembourg, Iceland, very impressive from Iceland. The Channel Islands, they don't count. The US, Qatar, Denmark, Ireland and Singapore. Now, some of these nations have got there thanks to their oil. Norway and Qatar, for example. Iceland doesn't have oil, but it does have lots of cheap energy. But oil isn't everything. Otherwise, you'd have the likes of Saudi Arabia, which is only 33rd, Venezuela, which was 56th, but that's 2014 numbers. And by the way, a little statistic for you, Venezuela has greater oil reserves than Saudi Arabia does. Not many people know that. And then there's Russia, 57th, or Iran in 90th. And again, Iran's data is out of date, so it's probably a little bit lower than that. So oil doesn't get you there by itself. And others have got onto that top 10 list because they're financial or commercial centres, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Singapore, for example. But the same regulatory options that have enabled these countries to be what they are open to other countries. They just haven't been adopted. But there is, however, one characteristic which is common to all of the top 10 ranking nations, bar one. And it is that they are small. Singapore, Norway both have populations around 5 million, Qatar 3 million, Luxembourg is around 500,000, Liechtenstein's population isn't even 40,000. And the one exception to this rule is the US, which ranks 6th. In 1950 it would have been top, and indeed in 1970 it was top. Back then though, the states were semi-autonomous and the country was on a gold standard, so its money was independent and sort of reasonably apolitical. But as its state has grown and powers become more centralised, the US ranking has slid. And this is because there is a direct correlation between the size of the state and the wealth of the people. The bigger the former, the smaller the latter. The bigger the state, the poorer the people. The more power is concentrated, the less wealth is spread. But in a small nation, forced to live from a smaller tax base, there's more of a limit to how big state institutions can grow. Monitoring becomes more efficient, it's harder to obfuscate, so there's more transparency and accountability and less waste. Change is easier to implement in smaller organisations, which makes the nation more flexible, more dynamic, more competitive. With fewer people, there's less of a wealth gap between those at the top and the bottom. And the evidence of history is that the freest countries with the widest dispersal of power have always been the most prosperous and innovative. The city-states of early and pre-Renaissance Italy are a good example. There was no single ruling body except for the Roman Catholic Church, and if people, ideas or innovation was suppressed in one state, they could quickly move to another. So there was competition. Venice in particular showed incredible innovation in turning apparently useless marsh into a unique, thriving city. And Renaissance Italy became breathtakingly prosperous, producing some of the greatest individuals that ever lived. But it will be overtaken by Protestant Northern Europe. The Bible was translated into local vernacular, and Gutenberg's printing press furthered the spread of knowledge and thus the decentralisation of power. And the pace was set by Holland, also made up of many small states. Then Britain led the pack. And in spite of its union with Scotland and its later empire building, England would disperse centralised power by reducing the authorities of the monarch after the Civil War, and later by linking its currency to gold. Now, since its unification in the late 19th century, Italy has been nothing like the force it once was, blighted by infighting, bureaucracy, organised crime, corruption, rent-seeking, inflation, division. Its state is bloated and its political system is dysfunctional, and it's 24th. So, back to Scotland. Scotland now has the opportunity, if it votes for independence, to enact the same legislation, taxation and regulation that the other top 10 countries on that list employ, following, say, the blueprint of Singapore or even Iceland. It already has a rich tradition in trade, in finance and banking, and it has the oil. And with just 5 million people, it's small. It has all the ingredients to be the richest country on earth on a per capita basis. It has the triple. I can think of no other nation in the world with such a wonderful opportunity. Now, the Scottish contribution to the world, whether it's in engineering, invention, industry, finance, has been astounding. Think Adam Smith, Alexander Fleming, John Logie Baird, James Watt. You can't doubt Scottish talent. They're formidable people, but they don't dominate the global stage as they once did. There'd been an incredibly tough period of adjustment to get through, but an independent Scotland, living off its tax base, with dynamism, self-belief restored, they can be great once again. But first, they have to make the right choices. And it must be said that with the statist inclinations of the SNP, they are away from making those right choices. But the option is there at least. Maybe, it needs to go bankrupt first. And what's made the situation so much more interesting is that the Shetland Islands, which I think may actually own the oil, or some of it, or a large portion of it, has said that they want to break away from an SNP-run Scotland. Imagine how wealthy an independent Shetland Islands would be. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe to my channel. I'll put more videos up as and when. And if I can just plug my books, as I always like to do, Daylight Robbery, How Tax Shaped Our Past and Will Change Our Future. The paperbacks are about to come out later this month, and the audiobook is shit hot, because I narrated it. But more importantly, I really wanted to plug my audiobook, The Shadow Punk Revolution, which has just come out. It's a sci-fi rock drama about invisibility. It's a metaphor for Bitcoin, and it's got the most amazing soundtrack that you've ever heard. And I promise you, it costs like £3 on iTunes. And I promise you, you will get way more than £3 worth of entertainment from it. I'm extremely proud of it. Let's put it that way.